This conference will now be recorded.
Thanks for reminding. I have started the recording session. All right, so I was just asking the question when somebody will use pass by value and when somebody will use pass by reference. I think that's where I stopped. So just open the same document, right? So when you talk about any program takes input and it returns some output. So input is in the form of some variable, right? We know that. So input will be in the form of some variable typically or value. I don't know what's happening with my pen. Okay. Just a second. So variable can be of any type here. So when you talk about input, it's some value of some type, right? So when you say a type, we're going to store the value inside a variable. So typically when you talk about real world, we see variables or values either of integer type, or it could be a real type, or it could be a complex type, right? And most of the other data types are built on top of it. So we have like in C integers, real values using float, double, etc. Then we have character types, which again another form of integer, and we can have a collection of those variables using arrays. And if we want, we can mix a set of variables which can be of any type and create a structure, right? So input to a program is nothing but a set of data, right, which comes in the form of variables. In terms of a programmer sees data as a set of variables, and output is also data in some form. Input is data, output is data. So if you look at a programmer's perspective, your program processes data which is stored inside variables, right? And this processing is nothing but a set of instructions. So when you want to define a program is nothing but a set of instructions which are executed on variables. That's what a program is about. When you talk about a function, so function is nothing but a smaller unit within a program, right? It also takes input. If you look at a function, right, it will take some input or inputs, you can say, and give some output. So in terms of function, we have inputs are called as parameters, right? And output is called as return value. Or you can also say it's a result of a function. So when you talk about inputs are passed as parameters, and parameters are of two types. Similarly, output can be returned in two ways. One is by using the return statement, and another is by using pass by reference. So pass by reference, one of the use case of pass by reference is to return the value of a function. Now, certain scenarios we cannot use return statement to return a value. A good example is that of arrays, right? For example, let's say you have a function foo, right? You have a function foo, and you are telling, okay, let's say inside the function you want to you're telling, okay, so I'll name the function as alloc. Let's say you have a function like this. So alloc function right? Take size as a parameter. So if you look at this function, let's say it creates a pointer. It creates a array or a pointer, you can say, and it does some memory allocation using malloc of some size. So don't look into details here. I'm just writing a function to show you where we need to definitely return a value, for example. So here, if you look at this program, you can see we are allocating memory and we are returning a value. So what is the type of this value? It's an integer pointer, right? So this pointer we can directly return as a parameter. Now let's take another example, a slightly different example. So instead of allocating an array dynamically, so let me define an array of some size. So can we return the address of the array here? Is it okay? Is this code valid? No. What is the reason why you cannot return the array? So Gautam says no return, no, cannot return local address. Okay, cannot return local address, gets deleted. No stack gets cleared. All right. So I understand that you are aware of this situation. So typically what happens is that this variable array, right, ARR, is defined inside a stack of alloc function. So array gets created here. Array is inside the alloc functions stack. Now what happens when the function returns? The function returns, this stack frame gets destroyed. So can we use a function like this to return an array? No, we cannot, right? So we cannot basically return an array using the return statement because the array is created locally. So what is the solution for this? What should we do? So can we have a, okay, so we can have multiple solutions. So can you tell me what all solutions you will try for so that this mechanism wherein you are able to return an array works? So I got two answers. One is use dynamic memory allocation. Okay, other is use static variable. True. Pass array as a pointer. That is another answer. All right. Create array in main and pass the address. Good. So depending upon the scenario, for example, let's say you have an array already created, then we don't have a question about it, right? So we can, for example, in main function, I can create a array of some size, whatever is the size, doesn't matter, right? And I can call a function by some name foo and pass the array, and you can also pass the size of the array. So we know this. So here we are using pass by reference here. So what does A indicate here? A is called as the base address of the array. So when you want to pass an array in C, this is the only option available, right? We have to pass the base address of the array. So will the whole array gets passed by any chance? Is there a mechanism in C wherein you can pass the whole array? Is it possible to pass the entire array? No, it isn't, right? We know this. So there is no way we can pass the whole array in C. So only way to pass an array is pass by reference. when you talk about arrays, we know that this is the only option available. What about structures? So you have a structure. So can you use pass by value for a structure? Is it possible? Yeah, structures can be used. Structures can be passed by using pass by value as well as pass by reference, right? So it's possible to pass a structure by value as well as reference. So why do you think it works? So primary reason it works is because structure, in case of structure, assignment operator works, right? So assignment operation is valid for a structure. That's the reason structures can be passed by value. Whereas in case of arrays, yes, assignment operator will work only if the array is on the right hand side. Array name cannot come on the left hand side because array is treated as a constant pointer. So another question I asked was which one was better here, right? So structures, in case of pass by value. So when we'll use pass by value, when we'll use pass by reference, the question. So typically inputs to a function can be categorized into 3 types. Okay, so one type is, or parameters, not inputs. So parameters can be classified into 3 types. So parameters can be an input parameter, right? A function takes input, so such parameters are called as input parameters, and you can pass input parameters by using pass by value. Second is output parameter. So output parameters can be returned by using reference, right? Third, there is one more option called as in-out parameter. So this also can be implemented by using pass by reference. All right. So input parameter you all are familiar with. For example, let's say you want to pass 2 integer values as an argument, right? You can directly pass the arguments by value. You don't have to pass it by reference. Output parameter, for example, you want to store the result. You are performing some calculation inside a function and you want to store the result in a pointer variable. That's what is output parameters. So what is in-out parameters is the question. So maybe I'll show you using some example so that you understand what this is. So let me open the terminal. For example, if I write a code like this, somebody is not on mute.
Sir, can you maximize the screen?
Okay, sorry. Right, I hope the font is visible. So here, I think this example you already would have done. For example, you're doing this sum star sum underscore ptr is equal to num1 plus num2. So maybe I'll take for now something like this. All right, so here we can see we have a function called as sum product, and this function takes 3 parameters, right? So you see we have this code. So let me write another program, another function, square int star ptr. Okay. So I can simply define some variables. Let's say a equal to 5, b equal to 10, and you can say sum. Right? So some pointer call it as sum function instead of sum product. Say a comma b comma. Similarly, square of, let's say, so we have this code. I hope you can see this code. Right, so this code we have. Let me just take a snapshot of this. Okay. All right. So if you look at the first function, you can see here we have 2 parameters num1 and num2. So these 2 parameters are called as input parameter, right? So this function sum, if you look at the sum function, the idea is we need to find the sum of 2 numbers, and so sum of those 2 numbers are stored inside star sum pointer, right? So function sum, if you look at the function sum, it takes 2 inputs, 2 numbers num1 and num2, or a and b, and it returns the result. So num1 and num2, right, they are passed by value, whereas result, I'm not using the return statement. Instead, I'm using pass by a reference to return the statement. So result is the output. So here, in case of function parameters, to pass inputs, you can use pass by value. To return an output, you can use pass by reference. So this sum pointer is an output parameter, called as an output parameter, whereas num1 and num2 are called as input parameters. Now, when you talk about in-out parameters, anybody has any questions? Let me know. It's a very fundamental thing. So let me switch to the document view. All right. So when you talk about in-out parameters, the second function, if you see square, right? You have a function square here. So this function square, if you look at it, we're calling this function by using its reference, right? Square of a. But a already contains a value 5. So question is this input parameter or output parameter? And what will be the value of square a after the function is called? Can you tell me? Right, I'm getting answers. Almost everybody is telling the answer is 25. That's correct. So is it a here passing ampersand a here, right? Is ampersand a or here in case of basically argument int star ptr, is it an input parameter or output parameter? So when you say input parameter, you're passing the argument as an input. When you're saying output parameter, you're expecting the function to store the result. So I'm getting answers here. People are telling it is both, right? Some are telling it's output parameter, IO parameter. All right. So this is a good example of in-out parameter. So here ampersand here we can see it's in star ptr. In star ptr is an in-out parameter. It's called as in-out parameter. Reason for that is that if you look at this function square, we are passing address of a variable which already contains a value. A already has value 5. So this function, what it does is that it takes that value, computes the square of it, and store the result back into that original variable. So such parameters are called as in-out parameters. So when you talk about built-in functions, right, you will come across many string-related functions. It's a good example of what we can discuss in generals. We have string functions. Okay, I'll quit this. Save this. Man strlen. Okay, so you can see this function. Tell me what is str. We are using pass by reference here. Is it input parameter or output parameter? Gautam says it's output. Narendra Kumar, Ganesh says it's input. Tapan says it's output. Kavya says it's in-out parameter. in out, input, in out. Okay. Input, input. Okay. Getting multiple answers. So you have to understand very clearly here what is meant by input parameters. When I say input parameter, when you're calling the function, you're passing input to that function. String length, for example, right? What do you pass? You pass an existing string, right? We want to calculate the length of an existing string. So string already exists. And string length function will simply check how many characters are there in the string and returns the length. So question is, we had pass by reference, right? So when you say pass by reference, the confusion typically people have is that pass by reference is always used to return a value. In this case, this str, actually it's a constant pointer. Because it's constant, what is the implication? Can you change str or star str inside the string length function? Is string length function going to modify the original string, or it's only going to check the characters? Will it modify it? No, right? It doesn't get modified. The string length function will only read the characters, null character, it's going to only return. So this is an example of input parameter. It's not output parameter. So just because it's passed by reference, it doesn't mean it's an output parameter. So let me open another function which you typically use, and strcpy. So strcpy, right? So strcpy takes two strings. It copies one string to another. For example, let's say in strcpy, let's say s1 comma s2. So I'm calling this function. I hope it's visible. So question is, which one is input, which one is output? Is s1 input or s2 input here? Which string gets copied to which one? S1 gets copied to S2 or S2 gets copied to S1? Okay, so I'm getting S2 is input, S1 is output. S1 is copied to S2. S2 copied to S1. S1 copied to S2. That's a lot of confusion here. S2 copied to S1. Okay. S1 copied to S2. Okay, hold on. So we cannot directly guess this in fact, right? So what is that we need to do? We need to check with the function definition or function prototype, right? We should see. So whoever has implemented it, this function will know whether S1 gets copied to S2 or S2 gets copied to S1. So how do we check this? How do we validate this? How do I know S1 is input or S2 is input? What should we do? We cannot guess, right? Because it can be anything. If I write, I can, yeah, true. So we can look at the man page. Can say man strcpy. Right? If you look at strcpy, you can observe here. So first parameter is what? Destination, it says, right? It's a destination parameter, and the second parameter is source. So src or second parameter gets copied to first parameter, which is destination. Now do you observe one major difference between the first two parameters? The second parameter, which is the source parameter, is const. Why is it const? Is it mandatory to specify const, or what does it implicate? Why would somebody declare a function parameter as const? So by the way, both are strings. There is no difference between star str, star str, star src and star dst. How you access strings, there is no difference. So this is to differentiate between what? Input parameter and an output parameter. So whenever you see a constant string, it means that you can access the string, but you cannot modify it. You cannot modify the source string, and you're not supposed to do that also. You should not change something which is being passed to you as input. So if you look at this function prototype, it guarantees. What is it going to guarantee? That yes, your source string is not going to get changed. That's what this function guarantees. If you want, you can omit this const also, right? That's what we do. When we write functions, as for example, as novices or beginners, we don't basically pay attention to this const keyword often. So when you write code which is a professional quality code, it's important to basically differentiate between input parameter and output parameters. So when you have input parameter, always specify the const keyword, telling that this. Now the caller is basically very sure. Okay, caller knows that okay, this my parameter will not be modified inside the function. Whereas, what about the first argument? There is no const. What does that mean? It means it will get changed. Destination string is going to get changed. That's what it is. So I just wanted to emphasize on different types of basically arguments in with respect to functions. It can be an input parameter, it can be an output parameter. So let me switch back to this here, which we discussed typically. So can we use pass by reference for input parameter? Yes, we can, right? What is the mechanism? Use a constant pointer as parameter. You need to understand this. Example is constant strings. They are inputs. So output parameter, the only option is basically use pass by reference or return value. We know that. So we are talking about parameters here. Input parameter, it's passed by reference here. So square example which I showed you is an input parameter, right? We saw that. Okay, so this pointer is an input parameter. We discussed that. So hope it's clear. And you need to basically decide when will you use pass by value, when you'll use pass by reference, etc. So let me open the next question here. So if you have any questions, you can post in the chat window. I'll answer it maybe if possible. So next question is explain register and const keyword. So we put these questions because they are frequently asked in interviews. That's the reason we are putting these questions. Many of you may already know these questions. Some of you would have forgotten this. So we just wanted to remind you what exactly it is. So what is a register stand for? So when you say register, it's nothing but it's referring to the CPU register, right? The CPU register can be used to store value of a variable. That's what it is. So what is the reason there is emphasis on CPU register here? Why do you think? So when you talk about register variables, we know that okay, it gets stored inside a CPU register, right? So why would somebody define a variable as register? What is the emphasis? Speed, yeah, true. So faster access. So if you don't define a variable as register, where does it get stored? True. Okay, so I have got multiple answers. Faster because you can avoid memory access. Okay, so if you don't define a variable as register, it gets stored inside stack. I'm not referring to the program segment here. I'm talking about the memory type. So when you say memory type, yeah, it's a RAM. Karthik, Meghna, you're right. Sujit. So we're talking about RAM, right? So what are the different types of basically volatile memories? What all types of volatile memories exist where variables can be stored? So hope you are aware of difference between volatile and non-volatile storage. So when you talk about volatile memory, we primarily refer to RAM, right? But there are other basically volatile memory types which are often unknowingly used by you. So we have right CPU registers. So we have CPU register which is within the CPU, right? It's not something which is external to the CPU. It's part of the CPU. Then we have cache, right? So when you typically buy a desktop or a laptop, it will be mentioned on the specification that it has L1 cache, L2 cache, what is the amount of cache available, etc. Then we have the RAM, right? So three things are there. This is what we talk about volatile memory. So non-volatile can be anything, right? Secondary storage devices, your hard disk, your pen drive, CD-ROMs, etc. So when you talk about embedded systems, yes, we have ROM chips, flash chips are used in which the programs will be stored. And we know that when you run the program, typically the program gets loaded to RAM and CPU starts executing the instructions by fetching the instructions from RAM. So RAM contains your program instructions and data, right? So other than RAM, so please understand that your variables and your code, when you talk about code, is nothing but instructions. So instructions are stored in RAM. So when does it get stored in RAM? As soon as you run the program, right? As soon as you run the program, the program gets loaded into the RAM. And here there are basically certain other things which you don't understand here, that the entire program may not get loaded to RAM. There is something called lazy loading, etc. But typically, if you want the CPU to run a program, CPU cannot run the program from the disk. It has to run the program from RAM. And so CPU will fetch the instructions from a memory location and will execute the instructions one after another continuously from the physical RAM. So among this, which one is fastest? CPU, the register, cache, or RAM in terms of access? What do you guys think? I'm talking which one is fastest. Somebody is telling cache is fastest. Okay. Majority is telling CPU's registers are faster. Okay. CPU registers, cache. Okay. Cache. All right. Cache. CPU register. CPU register. All right. CPU registers. Okay. So this one typically is a straightforward thing. So I would say the CPU register is the fastest. Cache is something very fast, but not as fast as CPU register.
I can't log in.
Fastest is CPU register. Second comes what? Cache. After that comes your RAM. But in terms of basically memory locations available or size available, so this is like
Hello.
Limited set of registers are there. Who's this? Hello? Somebody's talking. All right. So in terms of basically size availability or number of registers available, so there is limited set of CPU registers available, right? Whereas cache, for example, you may have something like 1 MB cache, right? 4 MB cache, etc. It depends on the basically processor which you are having on your system. It could be in few kilobytes also if you maybe have a low-end basically system like embedded systems, etc. And you have RAM, right? So you'll have, nowadays you have GBs of RAM. So in terms of basically access speed, CPU registers are the fastest. Next comes cache, next comes RAM. So when CPU executes instructions, it will fetch the instructions from RAM and starts executing. Now, what is the use of cache is the question. Why do you think cache, or when does cache gets used? When does CPU utilize the cache? Can somebody tell me? Anybody? How do they use of cache? To load same memory, says Vamsi. Frequent operations, frequent accessing. Steady. Each application has its own cache. Okay, no. To load the next page, to access most frequently used part of memory. All right. For operation. So please understand, cache is just another memory type. It has limited memory, but it's faster to access. So frequently accessed data. So when you say variables, right? Let's talk about variables here. So variables get stored inside RAM. Let's say you're using a location of memory very frequently. You are accessing it, you are modifying it, and so on. So typically what this CPU does is that these basically locations are frequently accessed, right? They are copied to the cache. So you have data which is copied to the RAM, and CPU will access the data from cache instead of RAM, right? That's what it does. So instead of accessing the data from RAM again, if you want to access the same data, it will access the data from cache. So please understand that original data is available inside RAM. The data from RAM gets copied to the cache, and CPU will access the data from the cache instead of RAM because cache is faster. Now, it's possible that when you access another application from RAM, again that data will also get copied to cache, and CPU will access the data from the cache. So please understand, the size of cache is limited. So what will happen if the size is limited? Like each time you access new data, what's going to happen? Cache will get overwritten, right? So there's a concept of overwriting the cache. So advantage of using cache is that something which is very frequently accessed will remain there in cache. So this will reduce the read-write overheads from RAM. Okay, so anything which is frequently used will get stored inside the cache, and this will reduce the read-write cycle for the CPU from the cache. Now you might have heard about terminologies like cache hit and cache miss. Can somebody tell me what is cache hit, what is cache miss? You have studied this in college.
Sir, is this good to clear?
Sorry, you said something. Maybe you can type it. I'm not able to hear you. You can type in the chat window. Okay, Asus says, who's Asus? It's a laptop name. You can give your original names in the while registering. Okay. So when the data to be searched found is called as a cache hit. Okay. So if the data is not found, is a cache miss. That's true, right? So good. So cache hit terminology. You can read more about this. It's not something very important right now. So cache hit. So these terminology you should be aware of: cache hit and a cache miss, right? So cache hit is good actually. So why it's good? So cache hit means when the CPU is trying to access data, any data, so that data, if it's already available inside the cache, it will fetch the data from the cache instead of memory. So that means what? It can avoid the time consuming memory related operations. So if the data is available inside cache, it's called as a cache hit. The data is not available. So data is not available. So what does it do? It has to fetch the data from RAM. The data needs to be fetched from RAM, or data needs to be accessed from RAM. So this leads to a cache miss. So if your program is designed in such a way that it leads to more number of cache hits, it's good actually. Now people ask this question: how can I write a program which makes the which increases the cache hits? So this, I would say, is a little complex topic to be discussed for now. So only thing you have to keep in mind is that when you write programs, try to access data which are stored together closely. Okay, for example, let's say you are having an array, right? Let me take an example of how we can implement cache hits for more cache hits. Okay, so we have, let's have for loop, right? I'm having a for loop for I equal to 0, I less than something, 10,000, I plus plus. Some loop is there. And here, let's say I'm performing some operation on I. I'm also performing some operation on B of I. So let's Prashant, can you mute? So A of I, let's say, is stored in a location 5,000 in RAM, 50,000, let's say, and B is stored in a location which is 75,000. I'm just taking some random addresses here. Now A and B you are accessing inside the same loop, right? You're accessing A and B inside the same loop, but A and B are far away in RAM, right? And instruction after instruction, you're accessing memory addresses which are too distant from each other. So what do you think will happen here? Will it lead to cache hit or cache miss? Are you getting my question here? Let's say I'm accessing instruction 1 accesses A, instruction 2 accesses B, and they are too far apart, they are not nearby. So what will happen to the cache here? Or you're accessing maybe a chunk of memory from A, chunk of memory from B here. So this may lead to cache miss. The reason is that when you're accessing, maybe you're accessing and updating that memory location, possibly that since they are too distant apart, cache will be filled with A first, A's data, then cache will be filled with B's data. So cache overwrite is going to happen here, right? A will be fetched first, which is in a different location, then B will be fetched, which is in a different location. So this will cause the cache misses to increase. Now, what is the solution to this? If your program logic doesn't have dependency on A and B, I can split this into two loops. I can write it something like this. I can have a for loop I equal to whatever, and here I will access A of I. Then I'll write another for loop with the same maybe number, and here I'll access B of I. All right. Now what's happening? Can you tell me? So which one is better? Is this code better? Will it lead to cache hits? Can you explain it again? Now data is not overwritten. It's possible to fetch with if condition. Hit. So what's happening here is that you're running a loop, right? Let's say loop run for 10,000 times because the array is huge array. Let's assume the array is a huge array. So you'll run this loop to access memory which are closer. Okay. Access printing is also accessing, Pranay. When you say print, you need to fetch the data from RAM and then only you can print it. So you need to access that address. You should know where the variable is stored. Repeat the question, sir. Time complexity will be too much. Okay. I think we are getting into some additional details here. Let's try to focus on cache here. If you split a loop, right, and run a loop twice, it doesn't lead to time complexity. Time will not take more. You need to understand this. So I am performing X and Y operation inside a loop. The time taken will be X plus Y into number of times the loop runs. If I split the loop, let's say, and perform operation X inside one for loop and operation Y inside another for loop, time is not going to increase at all here. Please understand this. Yeah, little bit there could be a difference, but it's not a major difference, I would say. Now, let's focus on understanding what is cache hit and a cache miss. It's not about optimization here. So here, A of I, you're accessing in one shot within a for loop. While you're accessing A of I, A, let's say, will be stored inside the cache. A is stored inside the cache. After that, you're going to access B. So it's not going to randomly jump between A and B inside the memory location because they are far apart. So this is called as, such a program will lead to something called as cache locality, they call it. It's called as cache locality. Okay, it's like if you access data which is nearby, it's called as cache locality. Maybe if you have any more questions, you can talk to me offline. So what I'm trying to tell you is that cache memory is faster compared to RAM, and whenever a CPU executes executes a program, accesses data from RAM, cache is automatically managed. So we don't have control over cache. As a programmer, we will not have control over cache. Please understand this. It's automatically managed by the memory management unit. But we can write programs in such a way that we can reduce the cache misses by avoiding memory accesses which are too far apart. I just gave an example of 2 arrays here. There are many other examples which you can find. Yeah. One more question I'm getting from Don Roy De Silva. What if we access A of 1, next iteration access A of 10,000? Will it be cache hit or cache miss? This question is quite a valid question. Since they are too far apart, it depends on multiple factors. It depends upon the size of the array. Now, if the size of the array which are accessing, right, it's too huge. In this case, yes, it's quite huge. They are far apart. So there is a possibility of cache miss here, because since they are too far apart, the pages which you are trying to access will not be loaded to the cache. So typically the memory, right, memory is divided into something called as pages. This you learn mostly in LI. right? So RAM is divided into something called as pages. And in Linux, for example, each page is of size 4 MB. So whenever you are basically loading something into the cache, maybe further it's divided into smaller pages, and a unit of that will get basically stored inside the cache. If they are too far apart, yes, it will lead to a cache miss. Jyotirmaya, I am using smartphone. I couldn't get screen glimpse while using laptop. Okay. Let's come back to the original topic of CPU registers. Okay. So is there a keyword in C to store data in cache? No, there is no keyword in C to store data into cache, because cache is automatically managed by the CPU and the memory management unit. So let's switch back to an example of how we can define a variable as register. Register.c. Hope you are aware of this, right? You just add a register keyword and the variable gets stored inside the CPU register if it's available. If it's not available, it defaults to RAM, right? So can we define a global variable as register variable, or it only applies for local variables? Can a global variable be defined as a register variable? Only if local variables we can define. So I'm getting different answers. Most of the people answered it's only for local variables. That's true. Now when somebody asks a question, you need to maybe think an answer, right? So when you talk about register variables, they get stored inside CPU register. Whereas when you talk about global variables, where do they get stored? Can you tell me where are global variables stored? In data segment, right? So global variables are stored inside data segment. So is it possible for you to define a global variable as register? No, we cannot. Okay, so we cannot define a global variable as register. It's not possible. You get a compilation error. For register variables typically are temporary. Apart from that, one big issue with register, or one big limitation of register variable, is that you cannot access register variables using its address. They don't have address. CPU registers, general purpose CPU registers, do not have address. How do you access CPU register? Let's say when you talk about assembly code, right? RAM you can access by giving its address. If you've done assembly programming, you'll know this. Any location in RAM you can access using address. How do you access a CPU register in assembly? Anybody? Can you access a CPU register by using its address? By name, Pavan Kumar, we are right. So you can access the CPU register by giving its name. That's the only way you can access. So you have to know the name of the CPU register. CPU registers are named, right? You will have, for example, you have done 8086 Pro, 8586 programming, you will have to give the name like AX, BX registers. You would have access it, right? So every register, CPU register will have a name. The CPU registers can be accessed by name. That is the reason these variables do not have what? Address, right? Address doesn't exist for register variables. So let me highlight important points with respect to register keyword. So register is a type variable qualifier in fact. Okay. So first thing is it's a request actually. So request to compiler to store the variable in CPU register. Right. So I mentioned here it's a request. So why is it a request? Because the number of CPU registers are limited. If all the registers are in use, then the request will fail. So it will fall back to what? RAM. Okay, it will fall back to RAM if unavailable. Okay, so please understand this. Majority of the times it will go through. We will have enough registers available, but if you define too many variables to be register variables, all the registers will get exhausted. You will not have enough registers available. So compiler will store the variable back in RAM. You will not get any error as such. Okay. Second, only local variables can be defined using register keyword. Third, they don't have any address. Okay, that means ampersand on a register variable doesn't work. Okay, this will throw a compilation error. So why do we create register variables? Because they are fast. Used to improve speed. Right. Typically, frequently accessed variables you can mark it as register variable. So anything which is frequently accessed variables, declared it as register. Like loop variables. Okay. So this is about register keyword. Okay, is that a question? Register keyword doesn't guarantee variable will be stored inside CPU register. True, it doesn't guarantee that. It is just an instruction to the compiler to store the variable inside the register. So compiler will check if it is available, it will store it because we have limited set of registers. If it's not available, it fall back to RAM. So next question is regarding const keyword. So const keyword, as you know, the name says, it's used to make the variable constant. You cannot change the value of a variable, right? So for normal variables which are not pointer variables, it's quite straightforward. Let's say I'm defining this const int max is equal to 100, right? So is this line number 7, is it allowed? Will it work? If not, what will happen? What error will you get? A compile time error or runtime error? Is it a compile time error or runtime error? Okay, so I'm getting answers, both answers I'm getting, compile time and runtime. Okay, So you need to understand the difference between compile time and runtime here. So when you say compile time, when you compile the program, GCC you type, right? So GCC, if I do GCC compile, say const 1.c. So this is what compilation is. So we got an error here. This is called a compile time error. So what is the runtime? So runtime typically when you run the program, it throws an exception. That's what basically runtime error is. So if the compiler fails to compile a program, it's called a compile time error. Now another question I have. When you run a program, do you require the compiler? Is compiler involved in any way when you run the program? Let's say I do /a.out. Do you need the compiler to be installed at all when you run a program? Okay, again I'm getting answers no, yes, no, yes, many no's. Okay, no, no. So what is compiler actually? What does it do? So compiler GCC, I'm typing this, right? So this is the compiler. GCC is a compiler. But when you run the program, we don't say GCC a.out. Do we say that? Do we say GCC a.out? No, we don't do that. Now the question is, who executes a program? Who's going to execute a program? Does the compiler execute a program? Or program is in fact executed by the CPU directly, right? Yeah, yes, bash may get involved, all those things are there. The compiler is just a translator. So compiler takes input as C program and it converts to machine code. So compiler is a translator. Please understand this. Compiler translate code in one language to another language. Typically code in high level language to machine level language. That's a compiler. For example, GCC is a C compiler. It converts a C program to machine code. When you run the program, the compiler is nowhere in the picture. Please understand this. Compiler is not at all involved when you run the program. All these programs, when you run, they get loaded inside RAM by using a program called as loader, and CPU directly executes the program. So instructions are directly executed by the CPU. Compiler doesn't come into picture. So when do you get compile time error? When you're compiling the program or C program, you're converting it to executable program using GCC. If there is any mistake in your code, two types of basically mistakes could be there in the code, right? What are the two types of basically checks the compiler does? So compiler checks for two things. What are the two things? It checks for the syntax. It also checks for what apart from syntax? Semantic, yeah. So it also checks for semantics, semantic errors. Syntax, I think everybody understands, right? For example, you miss a semicolon, you don't put a bracket, right? And you, let's say you forget to define a variable. Okay, all these you can call it as, for example, errors which are related to syntax errors. So what are semantic errors? So when you say semantic, you are nothing but breaking a rule, right? You're breaking a rule here. So the compiler will have defined certain rules, and if you break those rules, it will lead to something called as semantic errors. So most of you are familiar with syntax errors. You forget to put something, or you don't close the bracket, you don't open the bracket, etc. And so on. We get these type of errors. So can you give us some examples of semantic errors? So one example just now I showed is this const. Right? I showed this error. So what does it say? Assignment of read-only variable max. Max is equal to 500 we are doing. So max is defined as a constant and we are trying to change it. We are breaking the rule here. We defined it as max. We are breaking the rule. So such errors are called as semantic errors. Can you give another example of semantic error, somebody? It's not a syntax error. Syntax is perfectly fine here. There's nothing wrong with the syntax, but this is not allowed because max is constant. Any other example of semantic error? Accessing null pointer is not a semantic error because I'm talking about compiler here. Null pointer dereferencing is a runtime error. Redeclaration, okay, using break outside the loop, all right. Declaring variable again. Accessing address of register variable, true, okay, good. Using ampersand in register, fine. Using float values in switch cases, correct. So here some people are mixing runtime with compile time. Pointer access, if the program compiles without any error, it generates an executable. Then after that, if you run the program, if you get an error, it's called runtime error. So please don't mix up this segmentation fault thing here. Segmentation fault has nothing to do with the compiler. Please understand this. L value required, okay, good. L value error. Global declaration of register variables, correct. Okay, so hope you got it, right? Same variable to global and static name declarations, fine. Okay, undeclared variable. So most of the times if you break a rule, right, it's called as a semantic error. For example, in case of array, let's say you have an array int a, right, of 5. I do something like a is equal to another b. Let's assume b is another array, right? So this, if you see, there is no error in the syntax. Syntax wise, it's perfect, right? There is nothing wrong. A is equal to b is a valid statement. But you're breaking the rule here. What is the rule breaking? A is a constant pointer, base address, right? It's a constant pointer. We cannot change it. So these are some of the examples of a semantic error. Another example could be, for example, using ampersand on a register variable. Here also basically it's perfectly fine in the syntax because a register is a variable. There is a variable, let's say, which is a register variable. Ampersand on register variable is not supported. It's an invalid operation. These are example of semantic errors. And there are more such examples, but you need to differentiate between syntax and semantic. Now, what is runtime error? So runtime error occurs when after you run the program, right? Or during execution, after or on execution, you can say. Okay, so yeah, examples: segmentation fault. These are example of runtime error. On execution, if error occurs, right, you do ./a.out, you run the program, not during compilation. Yeah, segmentation fault is a good example. So segmentation fault can occur because of various reasons, right? When you do null pointer dereferencing, accessing uninitialized pointer, such accessing basically read-only memory, modifying read-only memory, etc. Stack overflow can also happen. Good. Okay. So these are examples of runtime errors. So typically when you say runtime error, the program will crash, right? That's what is runtime error. Program crashes. You get a seg fault. So these are examples of runtime error. So compiler cannot catch these errors, right? It's not possible for the compiler to find out whether you have like accessing some memory location which is invalid, right? Will not apply that much of intelligence. It will only check for the syntax and semantics. It's not the job of the compiler. So whose job it is to check whether you are doing some violation? Who will catch these errors? Who is going to catch this? Right? What leads to the program? What will make the program crash actually? Crash is good or bad? So Nasruddin Sheikh says, yeah, controller. True. Kernel. Who is going to basically catch these issues actually, errors? Who will catch this? I'm getting answers like CPU handler, exception handler, etc. The question is, who will know that a program is doing something wrong actually? So actually you get a runtime error when the program is doing something wrong, right? For example, you're accessing a memory location belonging to somebody else. Such things are there, right? Who will come to know? So in fact, these things, exceptions occur at a CPU level. Please understand this. CPU is executing an instruction. When the CPU executes an instruction, it finds something wrong. In that case, an exception occurs. So generally runtime errors occur because of executing, okay, because program executes an invalid operation. So this invalid operation, there could be many. One example of invalid operation is null pointer dereference, right? Okay, another example would be divide by 0 in case of integers, etc. So these are examples of operations which leads to exception. So exceptions are caught at CPU level. Exceptions occur at CPU level. Please understand this. So whenever an exception is raised at the CPU level, in fact, these things you'll learn more about these things in Linux internals. I just wanted to make you understand that at a CPU level, exception will occur, and whenever an exception occurs, the program which caused the exception will terminate. Okay, such errors are called as runtime errors. So I got multiple answers here. If the program gets crashed, where is it stored? Question I have not understood clearly. Where is it stored? What does it mean? The program will terminate. It's not running. After running, it doesn't exist in memory. So let me scroll back. I got some questions here. Okay. Code will get dumped. Okay, so that is also something we'll see. Core dump will occur. Core dump concepts, maybe if you familiar with Linux internals, you will be aware. Since this is a C related session, I'm not discussing about core dump and exception handling, etc. So why is it possible to change the value of const variable using pointers? Maybe we can discuss that later. You can ask the question when you discuss about pointers. So this is about like runtime error, difference between like compile time and runtime. So when you define a constant variable, you cannot change the value of that variable. So next question, can we do this? Let's say I did not initialize the constant variable. Will the program compile? First time I did not initialize. Will the program compile? Will this line throw an error? again the program will not compile because the rule is still valid, right? So if I compile it again, it gives the same exception, right? Because you're trying to change the constant variable. So what is mandatory for a variable? What is that we need to do for constant variables? So what is stored here by default? So what is stored here by default if for a constant integer variable? It's not a pointer, by the way, please understand, it's not a pointer related question. So some are telling 0, some are telling it's garbage value, 0, should define during declaration, garbage value. Okay, all right. So if we do not initialize any local variable, right? So what is that value which is stored inside this? It's garbage value. So it has some value. So you don't have to initialize any variable. Any variable will have some default value. It's not mandatory to initialize a variable typically in C, right? So if you don't initialize it, if the local variable, garbage value is stored. So max is a local variable. So here you did not, if we don't initialize a local variable, it will have some garbage value in it. Okay, it will be junk or garbage. But so it has a value. You're trying to change the value of the variable later, so this is not allowed. So it's the onus is on the programmer. The programmer should ensure that a constant integer variable or constant basic variables are always initialized. So this is a simple topic. I don't want to basically stress much on this. Typically, they'll ask these type of questions like variable is not initialized, can you change it, etc. You should be confident in saying that no, because you're breaking a semantic rule here. You cannot change the value of a constant variable. Let me move to the next question. Question number 3 here. Describe static keyword with an example. What is the difference between static global and global variable? Does static apply to functions? So this is a topic related to storage classes as such. And it's a one of the most commonly asked question in interviews. Many people don't answer this correctly, even if they would have done it multiple times. And I've seen people often mixing up static and const, right? Are they same, static and const? Is there any relationship between static and const at all? Anything? Const and static, is there any relationship between them? No, right? So true. So I'm getting answers. Most of the answers are no. So there is no relationship between static and const at all. Don't try to compare static and const. The const typically means that variable's value cannot be changed, right? Value cannot be changed. Static is a storage class. So static is a storage class. When you talk about storage classes, so we are trying to define two properties for a storage class, or we are trying to define two properties for a variable. What are the two properties we refer to when you talk about storage classes? Variable has two properties. What are they? So yeah, Sanket says it's scope and lifetime. Scope and lifetime. So variable have two properties. One property is called as scope. Another property is called as lifetime. Okay. So storage classes, mostly when you talk about storage classes, these storage classes will reflect the scope and lifetime of a variable, right? So we can have a session maybe on this tomorrow, because it's quite an exhaustive topic. Instead of this, maybe I will take the next question number 5, because 3 and 4 are related. I will maybe 3, 4 and 6 are related. It's going to take more time. Let me switch to question number 5 here. Explain the various stages of compilation and what options can you pass to GCC to generate the intermediate files. Okay, maybe I'll pick that question because we have just another half an hour to go, and remaining questions we can discuss tomorrow. So can you maybe write down the stages of compilation in the order? Stages, you can just mention the stages, right, in the order. Not the options. Don't put the options. So people are typing -IO, etc. I want like stages. What does the compiler do first, then next what, etc. So Vikram says pre-processing, compilation, assembler. Dhanush, okay, preprocessor, compiler, linker, assembler. True. Okay, so I think some of you answered pre-processing, compilation, assembly, linking. All right, good. Okay, so this is also something which very frequently asked in interviews. You should have clarity on the answer. I'll just maybe brief quickly what are the stages. So compiler is a translator. We all know this, right? So compiler is a translator. So input to the compiler. What is the input to the compiler? A .c file. Okay, so input to the compiler is a .c. For example, let me take a.c. So compiler takes the file as input, and stage of compilation is what? Pre-process. Okay, that's the first stage of compilation. So what is the next? So what is the output of pre-processing? What does it generate? So it generates a preprocess.c file. .c file. So it's going to generate a preprocess.c file. So C file will contain pre-processing constructs which like macros will be there, right? Hash include, conditional compilation, all these things will be there. So preprocessor will do a search replace, right? For example, if there is conditional compilation, let's say certain code will get commented and so on. So a.c will get passed to the preprocessor. Preprocessor will generate a preprocess.c file. What is the next step? Will come into picture next. Compile. Who will come into picture? So we have so this preprocess.c file is passed to the compiler. So what does the compiler do? The compiler will program. So it's going to transpile. What file does it generate? Assembly code or machine? I'm not getting answers. So compiler generates assembly code. Yes, Reshma, you're right. Okay, so it generates assembly code. That is the output of compilation. So this assembly code will get passed to whom? So assembly code is passed to the next stage. What is the next stage? It's passed to a assembler. Okay. So what does the assembler do? What does it generate? Object code it generates, or machine code it generates, right? So it generates object code, in fact. So we'll write it as object code, right? So object code is nothing but machine code, but you cannot directly run it. Okay. So there is one more step, last step. What is the last step? Involved as part of compilation. So last step is link. So what is the linker generate? Right, which you say a dot out, right? Typically we call it. What else can a linker generate? Anybody? Amol asks a question. Loader is part of compilation or not? No, loader is not part of compilation. Loader comes at time. Yeah, Reshma says libraries. That's true. So linker will generate an executable or a library. Output, I'm telling output of compilation. It may also generate a library. So it could generate a .so file also. Okay. So let's maybe talk about the let me just walk through this again. So preprocessor, first stage of compilation is preprocessor. Preprocessor generates preprocess.c file. Okay, so preprocessor will generate preprocess.c file. Next stage is compiler. Compiler generates assembly code. So assembly code depends upon your CPU. For example, if you're compiling the code on Intel, compiler will generate Intel assembly code. If you're going to compile the program on ARM, for example, it's going to generate assembly code using ARM instruction set. So you need to understand this. So compiler generates assembly code. Assembly code is again architecture specific. So next, this assembly code is passed to the assembler. So assembler is also another translate. So what does assembler do? It takes the assembly code and generates object code, which is machine code again. But this object code you cannot directly run. Certain other extra basically instructions need to be added so that it can be run directly on the CPU. So that's the job of the linker. So linker is the last stage of compilation, which does something called as linking. And finally, an executable is generated, which is by default what the most of the compiler generate. There is an option which you can pass to the compiler telling that generate a library instead of .so. So can you tell me what's the difference between an executable and a library? What is the only difference? What is the major difference between executable and library? Right, you have libc.so, libm.so. What is the difference between an executable and a library? So Kavya says we cannot run library. Okay. Main. So executable, right, can be run directly. Library, you cannot run it. You cannot run a library. So please understand, we can create multiple .c files. You can compile it, and after compilation you get an exe. Executable is nothing but a set of functions. If we see, any program will have some set of functions. So difference between executable and library is that executable you can execute it, library you cannot execute it. That's a difference. So what is the reason? Because executable will contain main function also. It will have main function also. Whereas library will not have what? Main. Library will not have main functions. So both executable and library will contain set of functions, but the major difference is that in an executable you will have main function. In a library you do not have main functions. So libraries cannot be run. Executable can be run. Now what is the use of library is a question. If you cannot run it, what is the use? Let's say I create a library. What do you do? Yes, you can be used in another code. Porting? No, it's not used for porting. It's for usability. True. So libraries are generally meant for code reusability. You can share it with others, right? Suppose you return a set of functions which you feel can be used by others. What do? You can compile the code into a library and you can give the library to others so that they can reuse your code. That's the idea. So typically libraries, to use a library you can, so applications can call functions from library by linking to it. That's how we use a library, right? Let's say you want to use a graphical library, or you want to use a math library, or you want to use a multi-threading library. So these library already provide a set of functions. If you want to use those functions, you can include the header file and call the function from those libraries by linking to it, right? So to link to a library you have to use -l option. We know this, right? For example, -lm, -l pthread if you've done multi-threaded programming on Linux, -l pthread and so on. So let me switch back to the previous window. So can you tell me what all options can be used to generate the intermediate output? So these are intermediate outputs. Pre-processing is intermediate stage, compilation is intermediate stage, assembling is intermediate stage, linking is also intermediate stage. So compilation is a step of various steps. So compilation process involves multiple basically stages or multiple steps. If you want to get the intermediate output, what can we do? So pre-processing, how do you perform pre-processing? Which option can we use? -e, right? That's the option we can use. How do you generate the assembly code? Can you use the option -s. How do you generate the object code? Can use the option -c. C is in lowercase here, by the way. How do you generate the executable? No option. Don't pass any option. Library also there is some steps involved here, like -static, you have to give, etc. So importantly, -e is used to generate the preprocessed output, -s is used to generate assembly code, and to generate object code you can use -lowercase c option. If you don't pass any option, it generates executable by default. So this is about various stages of compilation, and typically the extension used for these files, for assembly code the extension is .s. For object code the extension used is .o. That's the extension which is used. Anybody has any questions? Yeah, somebody mentioned an option called as minus save temp, Gautam. So this is also valid. GCC minus save temp temps. You can see the slides. It will generate all the intermediate files in one shot. Okay. So somebody asked a question, what is loader, right? So what is loader is a question which somebody asked. So loader doesn't come into picture here. During compile time, loader does not come into picture at all. So loader comes at runtime actually. So loader is a separate program. In fact, all these, right, pre-processing, compilation, assembly, linking, on Linux, they are separate programs actually. But GCC will call these programs separately to get the job done, in fact. But it's not visible to us, in fact. So loader, what does loader mean? Loader typically is used to load a program or exe. It's a program, not .c file, to RAM. That's what it is. And triggers the CPU to run the program. Okay, that's what the loader does. It comes at runtime. So when you do ./a.out, the loader comes into picture. It's not visible to you. Okay, so loader is there on your system. When you run a program using shell or when you do a double click, the loader program will copy the program or load the program from hard disk to RAM, and it will cause the CPU to execute the program from that RAM location. That's what it does. That's the job of the loader. Loader does not come into picture when you compile the program. So there is something called as ld.so in Linux, which acts as a loader. This ld.so will load program from disk to RAM. So I think I will stop here for today. I hope you were able to get an understanding of several concepts in C. So one of the things we would like to do is that we would like to start your lab related activities. So our lab mentors will get in touch with you in your WhatsApp groups. They mostly they will ask you to basically submit your assignments and explain the assignments, which assignments can be done on a weekly basis, so that you don't lose the touch. So I think it's almost 3 to 4 weeks then since we shut down, right, because of this lockdown. If it will be very good if we can resume our regular lab activities so that you don't lose the touch and you are prepared with. So also we have like some companies asking us to conduct interviews using video conferencing. So Qualcomm is one such company. So we have shortlisted few students. Most likely this week or next week they will have video conferencing interviews. So you can be prepared for interviews also. I feel some of them may get a call, so ensure that you prepare well. So that's why we are conducting these sessions, and also basically the lab we are going to start. So I'm assuming that most of you are having laptops, so you can pay attention to the lab mentors and communicate. So communication is the key here. So when somebody lab mentor asks you for something or somebody is some message is put in the group, please respond to that. I'm saying very few people responding. For example, in one of the groups, maybe Arun asked a question, nobody responded actually. It was quite sad actually. So please understand that our mentors are there to help you. So we have limitations in terms of not being able to explain you on premise, right? So we'll use the virtual classroom sessions or WhatsApp basically forum and some other forums we are trying to basically set up. So once basically that is also done, you can basically communicate very frequently. So please understand communication is the key here. And so you can cooperate and try to basically ramp up in the subjects which are currently doing as well as subjects which you have completed. All right. So one more thing is that with respect to the results, I hope you have seen this on Instagram, right? I think I posted it. So you can check our Instagram page, instagram.com/emergeit. Some of you, most of you who attended these sessions, I think they would have attended the quiz as well. So you can check the results on Instagram. All right. Any doubts you can ask. So I'll share the recorded session and the captured whiteboard session also. We can go through it. If you have any other doubts, you can ask in the chat window. Otherwise, you can send me an email also, not a problem. All right. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for attending this sessions. We'll continue tomorrow at 10:30 again.